All right. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome all of you to the 2026 ASPPH Public Health Innovation Lab Interest Meeting. Our time together today is going to include a couple of different things, but I want to just start from the perspective of saying that we're so excited that you're here. We're thrilled that you're interested in the Innovation Lab, that we have an opportunity to talk with you all about what it is and to answer any questions that you have, and hopefully to get you all equally excited about participating in this year's lab. Here's our plan for our time together. We'll do some welcome and introductions first. I will allow my colleague Tracy to introduce herself, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about me and why I'm leading this session. Then we're going to talk a bit about human-centered design and specifically how that's used in the innovation space, and then why that is relevant to the ASPPH Public Health Innovation Lab, and how you will use human-centered design if you are participating in the lab to develop an innovative solution to a public health challenge. We'll talk all about what that will look like, the logistics, the goals of the lab, all of the information that you need or might want to consider as you're thinking about registering for the lab. And then I'll answer any questions that you all have as well. So I want to start with welcome and introductions. And to do that, as I shared, I would love to hand it over to my colleague, Tracy, who is the Senior Director of Educational Pathways and Undergraduate Education at ASPPH. Tracy?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm really excited to see you. I'm really excited for the interest in this year's Innovation Lab. This is our third year, and it's become one of my favorite student events of the year. It is so much fun. So the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health is the voice of academic public health. We represent CEEF, or Council on Education for Public Health, schools and programs. So that means we have 155-ish graduate schools and programs. I think every single one that was listed so far is one of our members. And we have 92 undergraduate network members. So that's undergraduate programs. So science and bachelor's of art. So my team, which Marina is on the call today, she's one of our team members. We work on student pathways, so helping students find their path into public health and help them gain other experience to make them successful in the field. So we love the Innovation Lab. It's been such a great opportunity for doing that. And I'm excited to see what you all come up with this year. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Tracy. So I'd love to also just take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Axelson, and I am the founder and CEO of an organization called Beyond the Lecture. Specific to this context with ASPPH, I'm an innovation consultant who designed the Innovation Lab with ASPPH and have been doing this work in innovation, specifically in the public health arena, for actually closer to about 15 years at this point. There's a couple of examples up here of some of the work that I've done. I directed over $10 million in federal grants to catalyze innovation using human-centered design. I've led multiple accelerator programs and incubator programs in human-centered design, and in fact, I'm doing so right now as well. And that also includes work with world-renowned design firm IDEO, if you're familiar with them at all, as well as with the Stanford D School. And related to public health education specifically, I am a professorial lecturer at the George Washington University School of Public Health. I saw a couple GW folks in the chat. Happy to have you all here. I teach an undergraduate course in design thinking in public health, which I developed a couple of years ago at this point. So this is my space. I love innovation in public health, and I'm really excited again to be sharing it with you all in the context of this lab. I know folks started this already, and unfortunately we don't have time to have everyone introduce themselves, but please do drop into the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, your name, your university, your location, sort of where you are in the world. And if you want to share your year in school, whether you're a graduate or undergraduate or what you're studying, please feel free to do so as well. We're really happy to have all of you here. So we have already used the terms human-centered design and design thinking quite a bit in just the first 6 minutes of the session. Hopefully those are terms that you have heard before, but if you haven't, don't worry. We want to do a little bit of level setting, if you will, around what human-centered design is and how it relates to the innovation space. So I'm curious, and we'll do one more little waterfall chat just for engagement here and some interaction, because I know that's hard on these virtual sessions. What comes to mind when you think of innovation? So I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat just one word, maybe a 2 or 3 word phrase, but nothing extensive. What comes to mind when you think of innovation? We'll give folks a second to do that. Feel free to drop that into the chat for us. Great. I see creating new objects or ideas, groundwork, change, creativity, human-centered, groundbreaking. I love that. Solving problems. Yeah, these are great. Growth, fantastic. Disruption, creative solutions. Amazing. Yeah, innovation means lots of different things to lots of different folks, and it can look a lot of different ways in our space. These are some of the things that often come up for people, and it's many of the things that I've seen listed here in the chat so far with you all, right? Thinking about creativity, developing new solutions, new ideas. We saw growth in there as well, and really finding sort of vision and inspiration for the work that we're doing. But what we tend to see is that in the public health space, there's some challenges, and these are not limited to public health, I would say. We tend to see these across a lot of sort of social science oriented fields. Um, what we are usually asked to do, and a lot of this is tied to funding sources for public health, the fact that we often have to seek funding through grants or through foundations or through philanthropic sources. As such, we're typically asked to define a particular public health problem and then to build that solution to that public health problem, release it into the world, and hope that it has value. And usually that takes place through a process like a request for proposals, an RFP, sometimes if it's the federal government, referred to as a notice of award or an RFA. And so someone will say, I have this pot of money, solve this problem, tell me exactly how you're going to do it in this, 50 or 60 page grant application. And then if we fund you, you build it, put it out in the world, and hope it does what you said it would do. What we're tasked with doing in the innovation space is really reflecting on how we might do things differently and what the potential impact of doing things differently might be for public health. So I'm going to show a little video that introduces at a very basic level the concept of human-centered design. Folks might be familiar with this already. That's wonderful. If you're not, that's okay too. This will give you literally just a tiny taste of an introduction, and then we'll talk more about what that looks like and how that can change things when we think about that sort of build-release process and the associated risk that comes with putting in lots of time and resources ahead of time and hoping that a program does what we said it would do when we wrote an application. So here we go.
Human-centered design is a creative approach to problem solving, one that starts with people and ends with innovative solutions tailored to meet their needs. When you understand the people you're trying to reach and then design from their perspective, not only will you arrive at unexpected answers, but you'll come up with ideas that they'll embrace. Human-centered design is both how you think and what you do with it. It's a process that consists of 3 phases: inspiration, ideation, and implementation. The inspiration phase is about learning on the fly, opening yourself up to creative possibilities, and trusting that as long as you remain grounded in the desires of the people you're designing for, your ideas will evolve into the right solution. In the ideation phase, you come up with lots of ideas. Some too crazy to work, some too crazy not to try, and you'll refine them, tossing out the bad and improving the good. Making things helps you learn, grow, and test your ideas. Building a simple prototype gets your idea tangible and gives you something to put right back into the hands of the folks you're designing for. Without their input, you won't know if your solution is on target or how to evolve your idea. Keep iterating, testing, and integrating feedback until you've got everything just right. During the implementation phase, you'll build partnerships, shore up your business model, and get your idea out into the world, which was always the goal in the first place. Anyone can practice human-centered design, and everyone benefits. because it gets us all to solutions that are adopted and embraced.
All right. So you heard a couple of different things in, again, that very brief primer on human-centered design. And I see some folks reflecting on some of the commentary in the chat. I love that. Please feel free to drop in any reflections or reactions that you have. There's a few things that I want to lift up from that I think are relevant to this conversation and to the work that folks will be doing in the Innovation Lab if you're selected. The first is that human-centered design, or design thinking, as you might hear those terms interchangeably, is a process for innovation. Different organizations in this space will use different terms for what you see here, for the phases of it, for the work that it includes. But usually you'll see the same three broad phases to human-centered design, and those are inspiration, ideation, and execution. So in the inspiration phase, you'll use a series of tools and approaches to go what we call big and wide. You'll diverge and learn as much as you can about a particular topic that you're working on, exploring that through end user experiences and what other folks are going through. Then you'll synthesize those learnings and converge what you heard across all of that inspiration gathering work that you did, and use that synthesis to start your ideation phase. In ideation, your goal is to come up with as many different concepts as you can, again, going sort of big and wide, which is why you see that divergence there on the screen. And then using a systematic process to figure out which of these ideas actually have merit, which of these are feasible, which make sense, which are best aligned with the solution, or excuse me, the problem that we're trying to solve for, and perhaps which have the most feasibility of being a working solution. And there's a set of, again, tools and strategies to do that sort of evaluation. And that evaluation will bring you to a particular concept that's perhaps best suited for the work that you're doing, for the challenge that you want to solve for. As teams move forward in the field writ large, when they're doing human-centered design, that's where they might move into actually creating that solution, building it, putting it out into the world and allowing others to use it. And of course, evolving that solution over time. Especially in human-centered design, it's pretty rare for us to say that we're sort of done with a particular thing. We iterate often and rapidly, and we will continue to improve products and services that exist, even once they're out in the world and being used by people, because there's always an opportunity from our perspective to make things better for the folks that are using them. So first and foremost, it is a process in the sense that folks will generally move through these steps, and there might be nuance to how they do that and which one of these phases they're in at which time or how long they stay in them, but they are generally using this approach. Human-centered design is also a set of tools. So within each one of these phases, there are sort of, if not standard, kind of widely accepted tools that folks will use to do the work that usually happens in that phase. For example, there's tools around end user interviewing, there's tools around creating card sorts or conversation starters, there's tools related to observing colleagues in the field who are working on a particular topic that you might be working on, there's tools around immersions, there's lots of different ways that we can go about this work. And then lastly, human-centered design is really a way of thinking differently about our work. These are what we call the creative mindsets. The design thinking mindsets that you see listed here are things that support human-centered design, and they each have a lot more detailed meaning that we can talk about for folks who move into the innovation lab. But what I'd like for you to take out of this is that innovation and human-centered design as a tool in innovation is a way of thinking differently about our work. We embrace radical empathy for folks who are experiencing the challenge that we're trying to solve for. We're optimistic that there's always a solution. We just have to think about it. And maybe we haven't gotten to it yet, but there is one out there. We're comfortable with ambiguity. We're comfortable with saying we don't actually know what the solution is, or we don't know what direction we're going to go next. We'll figure it out, but we may not know in the moment, and that's okay. We make things to get them out into the world, to get people to react to them quickly. And then we learn from that work whether it's a failure or a success in order to iterate. And as I mentioned, we are iterating rapidly and often. And we believe that really everyone is capable of doing this kind of work, that creativity is a muscle, and the more we exercise it, the easier it gets. So, human centered designers will really go into this work, and innovators will go into this work sort of embracing this approach. And when we use human centered design, we actually create a different scenario in public health and in other fields that effectively reduces the risk of the way that public health funding is traditionally structured. So, as I mentioned, typically folks will be asked to define a problem, say exactly what the solution is going to be, put a ton of time, money, and resources into building that solution, share it with people, and hope it works. And there's a lot of risk in that process, not only in money, but time, capacity, effort, all of those things. But in human centered design, we build in these very small bursts. And in every one of those bursts, we take things back to the end users that are going to be using whatever product, service, or program we're developing and designing. And we get feedback from them over and over and over again, oftentimes building with them the next iteration of what we're developing. And the result of that is that we effectively reduce that risk over time because there's so many more opportunities to change what we're doing based on that feedback. And that means we're also using our resources effectively, both in time, capacity, and in money. And the ultimate result of all of that is this sort of innovation space and this trifecta, if you will, of what we call innovative products. So in the human-centered design world, products that are innovative meet all three of these categories. They're desirable to the folks who are going to use them. They're feasible in the sense that we can actually build them, and then they're viable from either a business perspective or an earned revenue perspective or whatever the sort of sustainability plan is for that particular product. And I do want to just lift up that in this trifecta, again, because we call it human-centered design, you probably won't be surprised to know that the one circle here that is the most important is that it is desirable to the folks who are going to use it. If people don't want it, it's not going to exist. That process leads us to products and services and programs. And I'm going to share here some of those that exist in the world, both writ large, things that you all might be familiar with, and then also some that are specific to public health, just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that might come out of this work in a public health space specifically. These are some of the products that were developed using a human-centered design process. Of course, lots of folks familiar with Airbnb. And let me be clear, I'm not endorsing any of these products. Some of them have their challenges, some of them have their strengths, many of them have both, but just want to let folks know. So Airbnb created with human-centered design, as was Uber Eats and Uber writ large, which lots of folks use every day or once a week or once a month. We have here also an example, and I actually think about this one often because I would really love to see this out in the world on a broader scale than it is right now. But I worked with some folks who were using human-centered design to develop accessible voting machines. And specifically, this was in LA County. And so this was one machine that was accessible to folks with visual impairments, hearing impairments, physical impairments, and several other categories, language differences in terms of the languages that they spoke, et cetera, with the goal of ultimately making voting more widely accessible for everyone. Human-centered design also informed the development of Willow, which is, if folks are familiar, the first wearable breast pump. This is out on the market being used by folks today. And then I'd love to share a couple that are sort of more health focused, as I mentioned. This has actually been bought now, but PillPack was an innovation that came through a human-centered design space, and I believe was actually purchased by Amazon, which perhaps is not surprising. And this was a prescription home delivery service to help folks who needed access to prescription medications. And there were some additional tools and components of PillPack related to making sure that folks knew like which medicines they had taken and when, and that they're reducing sort of prescription medication misuse due to confusion or not knowing when someone had taken their meds. OK So is an app that was developed about 8 years ago at this point through an incubator program that I led. And this was designed to address the issue of young people in particular having a lot of questions about sexual and reproductive health and not necessarily knowing where to go to get medically accurate information. The concern was that on the internet, you never know what young people are going to find. It may not be correct. It might not be aligned with their values. It might not be supportive. And so this is an app that was created to respond anonymously, or excuse me, to respond to anonymous questions from young people using a group of vetted experts in the field. And those experts include anything from teachers to social workers to public health folks to epidemiologists, all the way across the board. OK So was featured in the App Store twice and now has answered over 30,000 questions from young people all across the country. And so really just lifting up things that are developed to meet very specific public health needs. Because I work in the sexual and reproductive health space writ large, you'll see that I also have another SRH focused example here, which is Bedsider. And Bedsider is an online birth control support network run by Power to Decide, which is the National Reproductive Health Organization, specifically for folks 18 to 29. And so this is a resource to be able to share, again, medically accurate information with young adults in a tone and manner that resonates with them in the way that they'd like to receive information. And this was also created, of course, using human-centered design and co-designing with many, many young people ages 18 to 29 over 10 years ago when this was first created. All of this to say that human-centered design is an amazing tool and a fantastic tool for innovation, but I do also want to acknowledge that it is not without its flaws. It can take months or even a year to do sort of a full cycle of human-centered design and to do it well. And as such, it really does require a lot of time from a team of very committed individuals. As just one example of this, that design firm that I mentioned, IDEO, they create teams of 3 of their staff that work on a particular project, and those teams work only on that one project and nothing else for as long as that project is functioning. That might be 3 months, 6 months, or more. It also, of course, requires a significant investment of resources, and that can be both financial resources and non-financial resources, and that isn't always available to folks or to organizations. So rather than doing this extended process that's time intensive and resource intensive, but of course produces some great things, we can actually do this. And what you see here is a representation of what is called a design sprint, taking that entire process of human-centered design that we just talked about and shrinking that down into an incredibly condensed time frame to work towards similar outcomes. The Public Health Innovation Lab specifically is a facilitated design sprint, that very condensed format of the long form of human-centered design that we talked through. What that means is that in just 5 days, participating teams in the Innovation Lab go from a problem to a proposed solution, and along the way are using the human-centered design tools that they're learning about to design that solution. And I do just want to acknowledge, you can see the information here on the right. The design sprint specifically is a process that was lifted up by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky in a book they wrote called Sprint. It's a great book, but it's very specifically sort of steps and an approach. If folks are interested, you're always welcome to check that out. So let's talk about what to expect in the Innovation Lab specifically and what this event looks like, which I hope is why you're all here. Here's the general overview of this Innovation Lab process and some of the decisions that you'll make along the way. So right now you're attending this interest meeting or maybe watching a recording of it. We're happy to have you here as well. And this session is giving you everything that hopefully you need to know about the ASPPH Innovation Lab and answering all of your questions. If after this session you want to participate, then you can identify a team of 3 undergraduate and or graduate students, and that includes yourself, who can attend the lab in person March 15th through 20th in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk about all of the specifics of this in just a second. We do encourage folks to bring diverse skill sets, diverse experiences or perspectives as well. So having a team composed of, some public health students and even some non-public health students or public health students across different subject areas, all of that is welcome. If you want to register once you have a team, then you'll go to the ASPPH Innovation Lab website. We'll put up a QR code at the end of this session to indicate your interest. And then the selected teams will attend one virtual session on February 27th, and then the in-person lab in March. And there they're going to get in-depth coaching and guidance around HCD and apply what they're learning to their particular challenge. And then as a part of that lab, you'll also learn how to prepare and deliver a pitch on your team's innovative solution. And you'll share that with a panel of judges, potentially in a semifinal round, depending on the number of teams that apply and are selected, or directly for our final round of judges. Those pitches are done as part of ASPPH's annual conference, which is taking place that same week in Washington, D.C. So let's dig into this a little bit more. I did want to just start, because it's always top of mind for folks, with the logistics of these time sessions that we're asking folks to be available. So if you are selected to be in the Innovation Lab with your team, you'll need to be present for all of these. The virtual session takes place on Friday, February 27th, and that is an hour and a half. And folks, of course, are participating in that remotely from wherever they are. And then Sunday, March 15th through Friday, March 20th, those will be in-person sessions at the Crystal Gateway Marriott in Arlington, Virginia. And you'll see here on Sunday, it is a half day starting at 1 o'clock so that folks can, if you would like to travel in that morning, will be 1 to 6. And then evening sessions Monday through Thursday from 3 to 6 p.m. each day. And then our Friday session in the morning is our final pitches. Here's what we're going to cover during each one of those sessions. So in the virtual session on Friday the 27th, we'll do a deeper dive into human-centered design, and we'll use some of those initial tools and strategies to start mapping the problem. Teams will have an opportunity to decide what particular public health challenge they want to work on, and then start to look at what the system is around that, what the particular challenges are within that broader challenge, and where they think they might focus their solution within the context of the Innovation Lab. When we get together in the first in-person day on Sunday, we'll take you through a process to start developing solutions and evaluating those solutions specific to your public health problem. And then you'll create a realistic prototype for what your final solution will be. You'll have the opportunity to test that realistic prototype with real end users out in the world. And then we'll move from that into helping prepare you for the pitch. And we do that over a couple of days to ensure that everyone feels confident, prepared, and ready to deliver their pitch in front of judges on Friday. So on Wednesday, we'll talk about how to build a pitch and tell an effective story through a pitch process. You'll build your pitch for your solution with your team. On Thursday, you'll practice those pitches in front of each other and in front of myself as a facilitator and a couple of other supportive folks who are there to give you not only encouragement, but also feedback on your pitch. And then you'll have time to revise that pitch and, of course, continue practicing leading into the final pitches on Friday morning. I do want to lift up for folks that if you participate in the Innovation Lab, you have the opportunity to select a problem of your choosing, a public health problem, of course, but we are going to ask you to select a problem that focuses on something experienced by young adults. The reason for that is that on Tuesday, as I mentioned, you're going to test your solution with real end users that you will recruit. And we'll talk more about how to do that for teams that are selected. And we want to make sure that specifically recruiting, identifying and recruiting those end users is not a barrier for you. So it's easier to do that if you're able to recruit and connect with other folks that you might know or who are in your network. And so we do that by working with young adults as opposed to sort of broader populations. You can imagine, for example, in my space or perhaps in the substance use space, if you were trying to solve for something related to substance use, working to find and recruit substance users who are not young people who might have, a lot of, who might have overlapping challenges in their space or intersectional challenges, if you will, might be more difficult than reaching out to folks who are already in your space or, again, in your peer network. So that's the focus on young adults. Here's some examples of things that teams from previous innovation labs have worked on. We've had teams look at things like food insecurity and accessibility, affordability. We've had lots of teams look at different aspects of mental health, including mental health and social media, mental health and overconsumption. In fact, our team last year that won the innovation lab was focused on mental health and overconsumption, social media use, sexual and reproductive healthcare access, primary care access or healthcare access for young people, and healthcare navigation, and lots of other topics. So there is a lot of space here to select something that is meaningful and of interest to you. Jennifer, I see your comment in the Q&A. We'll touch base on that in just a second as well, just as an FYI. Now, as I go through all of this, you might be wondering, like, how in the world are we going to do all of this in 5 days? That seems crazy. And it does a little bit, but I promise you that it works. Step one is learning the approach together at the lab. And then you work directly with your team, again, with support from myself as a facilitator, to apply that approach to your public health challenge. And we do this as sort of a repeated cycle across the 5 days with different tools and strategies. So you're learning it, you're applying it to your own problem. You're learning the next thing, you're applying it to your own problem. And that brings you successfully all the way through to the final pitch. Everyone who finishes the innovation lab then is able to list and describe sort of basic tools and strategies within HCD. You won't necessarily use all of them during the lab, but you'll at least become familiar with them. You'll be able to utilize that process to evaluate a complex and persistent public health problem, and again, to develop an innovative solution that's prioritizing end user feedback. We can talk about how you can leverage technology in the development of that solution. And then you'll also, of course, be able to create and deliver a compelling pitch using visual communication and storytelling. So you might be asking, well, is this for me? Should I be part of this? Thinking through whether or not it feels like a good fit. And I'd love to share with you why we think you should participate in the Innovation Lab, of course, to support your individual decision making. Really, it's because you get to hang out with amazing people. And as much as I mean that, it really is an incredible group, both of other students doing public health all over the country and facilitators, et cetera. There's a lot of great things that come out of participation in the lab. In addition to this sort of expert training in human-centered design, the winning team receives $1,500 or $500 per team member. They are also highlighted in ASPPH's social media and Friday Letter, which goes out to programs around the country. All team members who participate in the lab, regardless of your sort of final standing in the pitches, get free registration to the entire ASPPH annual conference, which is an amazing experience. If you haven't been before, I highly recommend it. You get a certificate of completion, which I will just say is an excellent addition to a career portfolio and a wonderful experience for you to be able to talk about with future employers. Of course, snacks and beverages during the in-person sessions, because we wouldn't leave you hungry or thirsty while we're asking you to focus on innovation. And more than anything, you have the opportunity to develop and pitch an innovative idea in front of public health leaders. Our judges are often deans or associate deans across schools of public health and across this space. And so we really are working to connect you with folks who have expertise and who want to support your innovative ideas. As someone asked in the chat, thank you so much, Jennifer, for lifting that up. There is no cost to participate in the lab. So participating as a student is at no cost to you. We do want to make sure that folks understand that teams that are not located in the DC area do need to have some sort of funding to support their travel cost to the lab. And that is, of course, because Sunday through Friday is in person. DC-based teams, if you're at a DC-based university, would just need whatever funding you would need for that sort of local travel, whether that's metro, parking, etc. We've included here just a couple of suggestions for supporting travel costs to the lab. We would love to be able to fund everyone to attend the lab, and we are working towards that in future years, hopefully with sponsorship from some other organizations. We're not there yet. And so while we aren't able to offer that to every student, we do want to support you all in the process of securing funding if you would like to attend. That might look like your team paying for yourselves or splitting costs. Perhaps you're viewing it as sort of an educational spring break trip if your school happens to be on spring break that week. Certainly, we would encourage you to inquire about any kind of financial support that your School of Public Health might be able to offer, or even your university more broadly. And if folks have specific questions about that, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, we want to support the process as much as we can while also being transparent that at this time we can't fund everyone's participation, but we do hope that you'll be able to secure funding to attend for whatever that looks like for where you're coming from. If all of this sounds good to you and you are interested in registering for the lab, here are your next steps. First, identify a 3-person team. Remember again that those diverse perspectives are encouraged. Having different folks thinking different ways is great. Next, you'll complete and submit the brief registration form on the ASPPH Innovation Lab website. I'll show you a QR code on the next slide. And you have until Sunday, February 1st to do that. If your team is not in the DC area, do start thinking about funding and working to figure out what that could look like for you all. And then as soon as you submit that registration in item number 2, you will get a link in your email inbox to a supplemental questionnaire. And you have a bit more time. And actually, I think that date might be wrong, Tracy. It says the 2nd, but I think it's after that because that's only one day. So you have more time then to complete the supplemental questionnaire and provide additional information. That's all the stuff that isn't as urgent. So it's things like, if you're participating, who is your emergency contact? Do you have food allergies? Like those sorts of things. So we give you a bit more time to pull that information together. And Tracy, if you aren't already and want to drop in the chat the correct dates for that, that would be great. And
That
then
actually
once
is
you,
the
oh, I'm
correct.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that is the correct date. So that's why you want to get registered early. It gives you more time to fill out the supplemental, but the supplemental isn't difficult. So if you do submit at the last second, you still have a whole day to fill out the rest. But that just means you really need to know who's on your team and all of their details.
Thanks, appreciate that. So if you register today, you have about 2 weeks to submit the supplemental. If you wait, that's fine, but just knowing you'll have a little bit of a shorter timeline to do that. And then once you've submitted your supplemental questionnaire, you just wait to hear from us. And ASPPH will notify the selected teams by Friday, February 6th. And of course, then we hope that folks are getting excited about the lab and about the opportunity to participate. So if you want to learn more, here is a QR code with a link to the ASPPH Innovation Lab website. You can read all of this information there. The recording will also be posted there after the session. And Tracy, if you want to drop the link in the chat, please also feel free. And then I'd love to open it up to questions. I know we've had some questions going on in the chat. Tracy's been doing a great job of answering those. And so want to make sure that if you have any other questions that we get those answered as well. I'll just review a couple of things that have come up in the chat while folks are maybe collecting their thoughts. And then if you have a question that hasn't been answered, we would love, if you're comfortable, please feel free to come off of mute and ask. If not, feel free to drop in the chat as well. So some really good questions here. Great points around HCD and radical empathy and thinking about desirability and what that looks like to folks. And even some experience with IDEO, which is awesome. As we mentioned, the recording will be available for folks who want to watch it after the session. Again, folks don't need to don't need to pay to participate. They need to pay to fund their travel if they're going to be attending from a different place. And then as Tracy shared as well here, you can combine schools. You can have folks from more than one school on a team. There's no requirements around that. And then I do see a note here, a question here around how strict the attendance requirement is. And I see a reference to having class on one of the days. I would say if you have a specific question about your attendance, if you can reach out to us, and we'll put our email addresses in the chat as well. Please let us know and we can sort of address that one-on-one. It's not to avoid answering the question at all, to be clear. It's just that we want to balance. There is sort of a specific requirement around attendance, and also make sure that we're understanding what the conflict might be and how we might be able to work around it if we can. So please do feel free to email us. I'm going to pause there and see what other questions folks have. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, I think, for a second. So if folks have questions, please feel free to come off mute or drop them in the chat. We'd love to make sure that we get them answered. Anything coming up for folks that you're curious about? Oh, great. I see a question. Can we connect with folks here to potentially create a mixed team? I love that idea. We haven't actually talked about that, but I would say absolutely. And perhaps what folks could do if they want to is if they're looking for a team, drop your information into the chat, drop your email address, something like that. And that will give you all a way to connect with one another after the session. Tracy, any other suggestions around that?
Um, I think that's the easiest is to connect here if you're interested. But worst case scenario, you could always send me an email. I will put my email in the chat and I can try to facilitate, but I can make no promises. Also, I do want to point out, I know Sarah said, ask your schools. A lot of schools have conference funding for students. So if you can say, I'm going to this annual meeting, I'm participating in this, they often, but not always, have some funding available, but you just have to figure out what that is. So usually I recommend you go to your student services office, but also you could try your career service office, and somebody in one of those two places should be able to point you in the right direction.
Thanks, Tracy. Other questions? I'll give folks a minute if they're typing or processing. I know sometimes questions take a minute to come up for us. If something is still bubbling up for you, please do feel free to drop it in the chat. I think I'll speak for both of us, but Tracy, let me know. I'm happy to hang out here for a second or two. If folks have a question at the end that they would prefer to ask after folks sign off for any reason. Thank you. I see some folks connecting around potential teams, which is great. I love that. Please continue to do that. And then if anyone has any other questions, we are available. Tracy put her email into the chat as well as the ASPPH email address. Please do not hesitate to reach out. We are so, so happy to answer your questions and want to make sure that you're clear on what the lab will look like. One more that just came in, is there any work to be done after in-person hours, or is everything done during that allotted time? That is a great question. Thank you so much for asking. The answer is a little bit of it depends. with a lean towards yes, most teams are doing work in between the in-person sessions. The level of work and the amount of work both depends on what your team wants to do and also varies depending on where we are in the week. So the heaviest portions for folks are recruiting end users, which is very early on in the week, sort of Sunday, Monday. And then Wednesday through Friday for preparing your final pitch, practicing, rehearsing, getting ready to deliver that. The work in between that, again, is a little bit sort of dependent on how much your team wants to do. It's certainly not, 12 to 15 hours of work every day or anything crazy like that. So I hope that helps. And if you have other questions about that, please do let us know. At least the past 2 years, the teams that have participated have been teams that have, might have classes or other activities going on, during the day. And we do recognize that a lot of folks might not be on break and might have classes and things happening. So we do try to make it doable for everyone from that perspective.
Also, just thinking through the people who are putting your information in the chat, this is great. We'll capture that and I will send an email to all of you that say you're interested in a mixed team so that you all have it. So you're not scrambling right now to connect.
I'm so glad the meeting was helpful. I am completely biased because I designed and facilitated, but the Innovation Lab is so, so, so much fun. And I really hope that all of you will choose to participate. Anything that comes out of the Innovation Lab is your own, it is your IP. We actually have teams from the first year who went on to invest their winnings from the lab in developing their own LLC and moved from there to building their solution and received money from UCLA to build out their product. And it now exists in the world around food accessibility at American University. So absolutely, it's yours. It's your idea to do with it what you want. And we, to the extent that we can, will fully and totally support you doing that as well. Again, thank you all so much for coming. We really hope to see your registrations for the Innovation Lab, and we hope to see you there. I'll hang around. Tracy will hang around if you have any other questions. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great day.
Can't wait to see you in March.
Yay! Bye, y'all.